It's been a while.
It's been a minute.
I,
I
lo- I,
know.
I lose track of the episodes that we do together, and it's nice to be back.
Yeah, these are some of my favorites, to be honest. It's good. It's
Yeah,
like
because
home.
I think it's because we know each other so well.
Yeah. Yeah. We
Like
spend a lot of time
I
doing
think
this. It's just not on the mics.
that's true. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
we're probably on 6 hours of calls a week. Is that maybe on the
Yeah.
high end? But seriously, like
Maybe on
I
the
would say
high end,
that's
yeah.
fair. On the high
Depends on
end,
what's
6 hours,
going
depending on what we got going on, right? So,
on.
um, which is good because I like to save these topics with you because I know like I get it. And I don't want to say anyone else we do a podcast with isn't like a deep thinker. I just know the directions that you dig.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's good, man. It's good to have these conversations. I think it's things that we all kind of think about, but I think that I've definitely been thinking about these things a lot, and I always like to get your perspective because I know that you think about everything a lot. So it's always good to hear where your brain's at.
Yeah, yeah. I use this as it's nice to know where it's at too because a lot of times I have no fucking clue where it goes. But yeah,
Well, I'm here for you, man.
the art, dude, you've been there for me. The art of making decisions. And look, there's like a lot of books on this. I've actually read a few books on this. Um, and this isn't going to be like uh, do, defer. There's like 4 Ds of decision making. I read that book once. Um,
The 4 Ds.
do,
That's not a book I'm going to
yeah,
read.
4 Ds, 4 Ds of decision making. Um, but yeah, so it has everything and nothing to do with fitness.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is it should be like the new tagline of fitness. The RX podcast is like it has everything and nothing to do with fitness because like I think one thing people lack, whether it's you know, do you fucking follow the guy home who cut you off in traffic, or do you do leg press before you back squat? Is you just don't have or you don't understand your default way of making decisions, which is so huge.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think,
And if
and
you can
that's where I think it's
standardize
more
that and
important.
default to it, yeah, exactly. If you can standardize that and default to it, then you can now assess that and modify that depending on the quality of the decisions that you're making.
And I think that's where a lot of people miss the boat is they try and without understanding where they are in the process of making decisions, they try and instill a new framework. But it's like the
Right.
new framework is laying over puzzle pieces that have certain shapes and biases towards adopting certain habits and activities, where it's like those pieces aren't going to fit, right? Those pieces of like the new decision making framework is not going to fit adjacent in line with the puzzle pieces that you have pre-existing. And the thing is that why these systems never work is there's never a smoothing of edges of your current process. There's never an understanding of what are the shapes of the current holes that I'm looking to fill with a new way of making decisions so that I can begin to groove this new system to fit into my like idiosyncrasies that I carry with me. And the thing is, things that are idiosyncratic are usually things that are, you know, autonomic, things that are being done without your say so, without your know how. So I think just the recognition is big, and it's something that when you have an idea, when you have at least the awareness of your initial framework, like almost like a diet recall. It's like a mental diet recall. It's like, what have you been eating for the last 3 days? It's like, oh, you've had like 89% of your calories from Lay's potato chips. And it's like, okay, all right. Well, then at least we now know what your caloric breakdown is rather than just being like, here's your diet plan, chicken and rice. It's like, what? That makes no sense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So a big part of this is just self-awareness, being able to be aware and be self-aware and understand that whether you're making decisions or not, you're making decisions, and being able to assess the reason behind the decisions that you're making and understand that there's nothing wrong with making the wrong decision as long as you recognize that, and you can calibrate for that. So I thought it was a very
Yeah.
productive conversation.
Yeah. And the worst decision is no decision. And that is a choice.
Yeah.
Understanding, like, look, if you're listening to this podcast, and there's a lot of countries that listen to this podcast, so I don't want to say this is a blanket statement because some of them aren't doing great. But I would say, on the whole, it's like most people, if you're listening to this, you probably have more decisions than you think. And recognizing
Yeah.
those decisions is like step number one. But where are your opportunities to decide on things that you might not think can be something that you can decide on, that you can choose, that you have options or variability or freedom, as I'd probably refer to it as. So that's number one. And then when a choice is a responsibility, right? And you abdicate responsibility by not choosing. And if you're going to move anywhere in the world, or even in through a progression of your own life in your own mind, you should be taking that responsibility at the very least. And a lot of people might willfully blind themselves to the decisions that they have as to abdicate that responsibility and not see or acknowledge to see the choices that they have because they'd rather default to inaction. Oh, I didn't even know I could do. No, you did. You did, and you're being a bitch, and you should not being a bitch, and you should probably just pick the wrong one. So at least you know it's like, well, that one was wrong, and now you're one step closer to making the right decision. But yeah, these are nice because they're never scripted, especially with me and you. It's just completely off the cuff. You finally tell. This is the Jiunta tell all. The story that was edited out of the podcast 300 episodes ago. It took 6 years to get it out. So this is
this is so full circle.
It is so full. Hopefully it's not the last podcast. Although we've sent way more heinous shit.
Right.
So this one's not bad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah,
absolutely.
Special thanks to sponsors Vivo Barefoot. I went from training with my Vivo Barefoots only on leg days. Now I wear them every training day. Actually, the apparel drop that drops this week.
Yeah.
If you guys are interested,
Friday.
Be the first to know. We're going to send the exclusive drop, and it is an exclusive drop. We're very limited stock on the hoodies, the tanks, and the sweatpants, just in time for the cold as balls season, as it's known north of everywhere but Miami. Jeez, man, I was in Vancouver last week, or we were in Vancouver last week.
Yeah,
I'm going soft, dog. I'm going soft. But yeah, drops this Friday. In actually, Killian caught the photos right before I was going to the gym, rocking the Vivos in that. So it's vivobarefoot.com/RX Radio, if I'm not mistaken, and the promo code is RX Radio 20. Super for me traveling. They're like the smallest things. I just toss them in my bag. They barely take up the size of like an iPad, if that. I think they're completely flat, super durable, go-to training shoe. So shout out to the guys at Vivo for allowing us to do this, because not a lot of companies would. And then HD Muscle, at checkout, 10% off RXD, but it's also in addition to any monthly sale they run. So if you go on their website and they're running like a 15% off sale, you get an additional 10% off with code RXD, all caps, I believe, on the HD Muscle site. So huge shout out to Dorian, to Noah, to Mariah, to Kathleen. I'm wearing an HD Muscle shirt. It's probably one of the few shirts that I actually wear. And new pre-workout HD Black. Mac and I have been using that for the last couple of weeks since they sent it over. Big fan. I'm like a micro pre-workout guy. I don't like, you know what it is? I don't like drinking a lot of fluid directly before I train. So if I got to do like a 30-gram scoop or something, like I'm just a water balloon, a complete bloat toad. It's like I can't. So they just came out with like a smaller one. I think it's like 15 grams per serving. Money. But yeah, now that the bills are paid, let's do it. Let's get into it. RX Radio episode 7084. Suck less, the art of making decisions, with your two favorite Jordans. Lundy, hit it.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Can you think of the worst decision you've ever made?
Oh, I've made some bad decisions in my life.
Hold on. I feel like low key, that was the first question we ever asked on the podcast, and it was like the one thing we never released. I was going back. Worst one that you can share with our friends at home.
I mean, I feel like at this point, I know, I probably don't know a fraction of the people that listen to this podcast, but I feel like I do, and I feel comfortable here. So we can just even go back to that same place. But
is that the worst one?
I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life. What's that?
I said, was that the worst one?
No, not even close. But a lot of my bad decisions kind of ended up or started the same way. I think when I was younger, I used to really like to drink alcohol. And that leads to a lot of bad decisions. And I've had a lot of dental work done because of a lot of those decisions. Like
Really?
I yeah, like I can be a person with a very punchable face because of the words that come out of my face sometimes.
See, I don't know this. I don't know this part of you.
Yeah, I've definitely calmed down a lot over the years. But I think instigating things was something that I really was good at, especially in the past. Is like just talking shit just to talk shit because I enjoy talking shit.
But is that because you knew how to fight? Like, is that part of it? You think
It was.
that like
I think a
you knew
big
how to
part of
throw
it
hands?
was, yeah, it was like not. Well, that's part of it. Yeah, is not being scared to get hit in the face, which is something I'm still very proud that I possess that quality. Is that I can take a punch, and I feel like if you can take a punch, you have a lot more confidence in a lot more scenarios than if you're scared of getting hit in the face.
Yeah, and a large part of that is like most people just aren't willing to go there, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. If it escalates to that point, like, all right, I'm still good. Like, this is gonna suck tomorrow, but like, I'm not gonna back down. But like,
Yeah,
I don't know. As I've gotten older, I've just gotten tired. I think I'm t-
that's what it is.
I'm tired to the point where there are definitely things. There will always be things that like I'll stand up for what I believe in, but there's less of those things, and they're much more important now. So I feel like when I was younger, I would just run my mouth just to run my mouth because that was a thing to do. But now it's like I don't really give a fuck. So it's not going to get to that point. It's not going to escalate to that point.
Most of my things that I would be inclined to throw hands over now have nothing to do with me.
Right. People you care about, things like
Right,
that
yeah,
is
like
is
the thought, yeah, exactly. Like the thought of so I literally had an instance today where a free agent in the NFL was ready to fight me, and I was just like, "All right, man. Like that's cool. Like if you want to fucking go, like I'll go yeah." And I'm not saying it would have went well for me. Like the dude was like 6'5" and probably like I don't know 230. Like he was an athletic dude. And I was just completely
Mhm.
oblivious. And apparently, like it was apparently like I'm not the first person to be in his crosshairs, but I was thinking of like how I used to would have reacted to that, and like I was so protective over my pride and ego. Where now I'm just like, I don't care, man. Like you want to be a
Yeah.
22-year-old big shot or something. Like, all right, cool. Like I have nothing to. I don't was like if I don't have anything to prove, or I just don't have any fight left in me, and it's just like I just
Dude,
want to go
I'm the
home
same fucking
and
way.
fucking eat my supper. You fuck, like get out of here. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. So most of your bad decisions then would be based off of uh, just things you did when you were drunk as a kid.
Yeah, for the most part, drunk or like you said, like egotistical things that I've made decisions like based off of what's going to fulfill my ego or what my ego wants me to do. But now I think
Yeah,
as I've gotten older, first off, I have more to lose, which is a
that's big.
big thing that kind of persuades me to make better decisions on a day to day basis. And I don't have as much ego. I definitely have ego over certain things. And I think some of that's like deserved to some degree. There's things that I think that, I don't know. Maybe it is ego. I feel like I deserve respect in certain areas. And when I don't get said respect, it really pisses me off. So
Yeah,
that's definitely one of the things that I think can like get me closer to that point. But I'm trying like the only things now that would get me to the point of like throwing hands is like someone maybe like mm, we'll say disrespecting. It starts with disrespect, and anything more than that, it's definitely gonna get to throwing hands. But disrespecting people I care about, I think is probably the biggest one, and that'll always be one. And then obviously like disrespecting me too. But I think
yeah.
that's
Well, I
the
love how we got to
majority
parse that
of
out
it.
because I love how disrespecting people you care about and disrespecting yourself are two different things. I don't give a fuck about myself anymore. I don't care. I'm in a separate
I'm just
category. I'm
here.
over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no. They're two different things, two totally different things. But yeah, I think
Oh
like
man.
some of the bad decisions I've made were just like reckless decisions. Um, like, yeah,
Do you remember
there's still
living
some
in
that
North
probably
Park?
I won't share on this podcast. But catch me in person, we'll talk about it.
Do you remember living in North Park?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So I may have told you this story. I once took it upon myself to reverse an 18-wheeler that someone was using to move into one of their places in North Park. And because what they were doing, like, it was the worst place. If you didn't have an extra parking spot, like, you were just driving around this massive apartment community for like days trying to find a spot. And like, they would have some bullshit like food truck event, and it was like some person with some bullshit communications degree that got hired as some sort of like, I'm the event coordinator at North. It's like, I don't want to see anyone that lives in my building ever. I don't want to see them in the fucking hallways. Like, I don't want to have a fucking churro next to my neighbor in the middle of the park. So they had this food truck night, and there was just less than no parking. And I just got home from work, and I was trying to park my shitty 1991 Ford Explorer, and there was like one spot, but it was being blocked by this massive 18-wheeler who had decided that they had to have the back of the trailer directly open to where like the gate was to get into the community, so someone was moving in and out. And I'm like, if you fucking guys backed up like 4 feet, I could park in this space. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and like circle the block, waited. There's no spots. I'm like, I've been driving around for an hour and a half. Fuck this. I've seen no one. So I hop behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler and I just start backing this thing up without really knowing what I'm doing. Dude, I hit another car.
Oh,
I hit a person's vehicle, because it's like the blind spots are a little bit different when you're driving a 4-story building. And I was like, oh my. And then the two Spanish guys who own said vehicle and moving company, they came flying in full force because they saw someone was stealing a truck. And it was at that point that I was like, oh, I could have a criminal record and get deported, get kicked out of Cairo school. I'm like, that was a really bad decision.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think I'm going to tell my story that we told on the first podcast and then edit it out, because I think there's a lot to be learned from it. There's some value in it that, like, I'm still, as I think about it now, I'm extracting things and I'm like, yeah, I make decisions the same exact way now. I just have better intentions when making my decisions.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was in high school. I think I was either junior or senior, like upperclassman. Really, my only thing that I was in high school for at this point was to wrestle. That was it. Wrestling was life. This was the end of football season. So like football season's the fall time, wrestling is the winter time. So I was like preseason. I wasn't in training yet. Me and a bunch of friends, we got together before the football game to tailgate. Started drinking some Captain Morgan rum. I remember that specifically. Got a little bit buzzed up. I know. And decided to paint our chests for the football game. So we're up in the crowd. We're like in the back row, just being drunk people with painted chests at the football game. It's almost halftime. I make the very logical decision that there's going to be a lot of people at the porta potty, so I'm not going to go all the way to the porta potties to take a piss. So I take a piss in like a Gatorade bottle, and I toss it over the back of the bleachers, and I, just get on with being drunk and rowdy.
No harm,
because that's
no foul.
Exactly. And I'd probably make the same decision today. I stand by that one. It gets worse though. I continue to make worse decisions in this story. So continue on with the game, doing the drunk rowdy thing. And then we see two cops walk up and kind of look through the crowd and kind of looking at us. And they point at me and they tell me to come down, and they pull me out and they're like, hey, so-and-so saw you take a piss and then throw it off the bleachers. And I'm like, yeah, I did that. And they're like, okay, well, have you been drinking? And of course I denied it. And they are cops, so they're not, well, they understood that I was drinking. So they pull me out. They take me outside of the stadium. I'm like leaning up against the car. I'm a minor at that point, so they call my parents. My parents come by. My dad is so fucking pissed. He is so pissed at me. So he comes up and he like grabs me by the shirt and starts like yelling, doing whatever. So I push him off me, like both hands, like chest pass push. And then the officers at that point are like, get out of the crowd. Get out of the crowd. He's resisting arrest.
From his father,
I'm like,
citizen's arrest?
yeah, dude. So they take me and they throw me. There's like a bus right next to it. They throw me into the bus. I like smash the entire like the vertical window on the door. I smashed the window with my body because they threw me into it. They throw me on the ground, like knee in the back, arms behind my back. They like handcuff me and take me to the station. And it's like this. I'm like, I had a mouth. I still do have a mouth. I just control it better. And I'm like talking shit to the cops the whole time. There's like a crowd of people around, dude. They're like rooting for me. But it was like this whole fucking
Can you give
thing.
me a sample track?
And
Can you give me a sample track of like what some of the chirps were? Like what are you saying? Like give me just like a couple one liners. Like were you like old
get the
school where you
fuck
called
off
them
me, you
pigs?
fat
Like,
piece of shit. Like
okay.
one of them was super
Yeah.
fat. He was like, yeah, he was like our officer at the school, so I kind of knew him, and like kids talk shit in high school, so like he was fat,
amazing.
so I let him know, and that was my opportunity to take those shots. Yeah, so they like took me to the police station, got out there, and like all in all, like nothing really came from it, but I got like suspended for like 3 months from the wrestling team, so I had to go to another school to wrestle for like that amount of time, but. Yeah, dude. It was a whole fucking ordeal. But like, as I look into this, I think of why did I make these decisions, right? And it's because of my values at the time, essentially, right? And my values and where my confidence lies. And I look at it and I'm like, all right, what was valuable to me at that time? And it was, probably how my friends thought of me, how I was perceived in the public eye. Being tough was a big part of my childhood growing up. I don't know if that's like the same with you, but like being like super masculine and tough, and like that's why I got into a lot of fights and like wrestling. That was just the culture. So it was like, I'm not going to back down. Like, you're going to challenge me, I'm going to stand up to that challenge. And just thinking of the way that I thought about this is I was confident in my abilities. Like, all right, whatever. Like, whatever happens, I'm confident in the outcome of this. So, and I think I make decisions in the same exact way now. I just have better intentions when doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, were you like the guy though? Like, what was that 3 months like for you after that went down? Like, were you just? I would assume in my high school you would be carried through the halls on someone's back, cheered and celebrated. People would write songs about you. Like that would be you'd be like the baddest dude.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it felt. Like I got suspended from school for like 2 weeks, so I was out of school for 2 weeks. After that, I came back, and it was almost like the talk of the town type thing. Like friends' parents knew about me that I didn't know. Like, you see that guy at the football game? So it was like this funny thing. And then like, dude, I got to go to this school. Coughlin was the high school, which like, oh fuck. All right, you know Eric Pullman? Pullman Performance?
Yes, I do. Pullman Performance.
Yeah.
A great follow on Instagram. Plug.
Yeah, especially for like wrestling strength and conditioning. So I'm not sure if they're still together, but he was working with a buddy that I met at that school. His name's Justin Accordino, who's like an incredible Pennsylvania wrestler, and he's now like a really good wrestling coach. I met him through that, him and his brother, Craig Kittrick, and like a bunch of friends that they're still some of the coolest people I've ever met just by wrestling at this high school. And it made me better because I got to wrestle with them, and they were better than the kids I was wrestling at my school. So it was like, ended up being a kind of cool scenario, but like I made some decisions that probably weren't the best in there, but in the context, it all worked. And actually, this is kind of a good point, because as I think about decision making and the way I think about making decisions, I think a big part of that is confidence, and having confidence in the decision that you make, that you'll be able to make the best of it. Right? I think a lot of people, when they think about making decisions, or the lack of making decisions, they do it because they're not confident in their abilities to traverse whatever comes from it. Right? Is that they maybe lack confidence in the outcome of that decision, as opposed to I don't know. It's if you approach it with I think the common terminology right now is fuck around and find out. With that type of mindset, it's like, I don't know, I'm going to fucking do it, and I'm going to make the best out of it, whatever comes of it. And like you and I have been in those decisions plenty of times where it's like, you don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think one of the
but
biggest
I know
things,
I can handle it.
Yeah, one of the biggest
What was
things to
that?
me is and you kind of alluded to it, is the indecision part. Because
Right.
I would say that's the one that gets chosen more often than not, is people choose to not choose, and they're not realizing that not
Yeah.
choosing is probably the worst choice. When you realize that that's a decision amongst itself, or in and amongst itself, that becomes, at least the awareness around that, I think, is the first step in making better decisions. Because a lot of people opt into the indecision without realizing that that itself is the worst decision you can make. And you see it all the time, and it scales based off of severity of the outcome, right? Like, most people
Hmm.
will opt to do nothing when the thought of doing something and doing it wrong has a major consequence, but not
Hmm.
realizing that usually in those cases, doing nothing brings about the worst of all consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think by doing nothing, you give up your ability to make a decision, right? You're just kind of at that point you're subject to whatever someone else decides, or whatever the scenario that you're in is. You don't have a say anymore.
Yeah, yeah, like, it's almost like people who don't vote complaining about politics. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, well, yeah, it's the vote that, whether you like candidates or not, it's still the vote that allows you to enter into the game. And a lot of people don't choose to enter into the game, but they would love to sit in the sidelines and yell into the and paint names on their chest and throw piss bottles over fences and stuff. But it's like, if you want to get involved, as they
Always a good
say,
option.
you want to, you have to at least cast a ballot, right? Whether you believe in the ballot or not, it's like you believe in yourself enough to throw a hat into the ring, or an ethos into the ring. So I think, like, if we're going to go down the route of decision making, like how that affects something as basic as exercise selection, I think understanding first that indecision making is the worst decision that you could pick.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as we kind of take it to the exercise realm, I think just understanding the repercussions of decisions too is like, it's not necessarily a right or a wrong decision. It's kind of a spectrum of better and worse decisions, right? Is that if we understand the situation that we're in and the decision that we're faced with, then we have the responsibility to gather as much information in that situation as possible, right? And that information is going to be the basis for decision making. So, whether that's a client, if that's taking a really in-depth injury history, like you're working with the football guys now, I'm sure that's something incredibly important in the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis. Is you have to know what you're dealing with for you to make the right decision, or not even, I'm sorry, not a right decision, but a better decision for that person. Is just gathering as much information as possible, because you, you can never really know the outcome of the decision that you're going to make, but you can make more correct decisions most of the time if you do a diligent job of gathering as much information as you can, and then using that as the basis for your decision making.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like you alluded to something just there that's super important, is first understanding the consequences of the decision. And when it comes to exercise, the consequences of doing things wrong are very minimal. But I honestly think in people's minds, the consequences of doing things wrong or worse is directly centered to their particular ethos, or who they follow on social media, or what trend or
Yeah.
what style that they ascribe to, where it's like, none of that matters. We maybe know.
Yeah.
I had Andy O'Brien, who's Sidney Crosby's strength coach. We sat down years ago, and he was explaining to me that, and this guy has data points on 18 different acceleration patterns in hockey players. Like, and I was like, what? And like, he has a series of criteria that has 4,800 data points. That's to qualify one particular movement pattern. And I was like, that's insane. And he goes, yeah, we probably only know about 5% of what there is to know about all of this. And I was like, well, that's kind of demoralizing. And I know 5% of what you know, so I know like next to nothing. And I think that's like the biggest thing that leads to the worst decision possible, which is indecision. Right? People stay in this
Yeah.
static state because they're so worried about the consequence of being wrong. And it's like, you don't understand that the wrongest answer is doing nothing or not changing. and it's so easily the default that people opt into because it's safe from scrutiny, right? It's safe from like, oh, like why are you doing that? And I think that's something that try and shoot holes into it, because I think the biggest issue people have is they don't know, they know what they don't know. And I think that's like a pretty scary place to be, because like there is so much information, because like there's 4 potential outcomes, right? Like not knowing what you know, which is like, that's not a terrible thing, that most people don't lose sleep over not knowing what they know, right? Most people don't lose sleep over knowing what they know. Most people will never lose sleep over not knowing what they know, or not knowing what they don't know, which is like where I lose a lot of sleep, is like, what are the unknown unknowns? And then, but the known unknowns are like the precipice of most people who like maybe lack self-awareness. They read a few posts on imposter syndrome on Instagram. They also have read a post about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and they maybe listen to some people that they have put on a pedestal that are smart, like, maybe like it's our podcast or other people's podcasts, and they get like this fear that like we're going to see them in a gym one day doing a particular exercise, and give a shit. Like, I can't stress that. I do not care what people do. Like, you're on your own time. I'm like Bradley Cooper in The Hangover. Like, school's over. I don't know you. You do not exist. And then they think that there's some sort of repercussion from it. Like, they operate as if like the exercise police are going to be coming in, like serving subpoenas and like warrants, and people are going to go to like exercise jail. And it's just like, I think that's the thing that trips people up, is like they focus on the known unknowns without focusing on what they actually know. And look, if you shit in one hand and wish in the other, what one's going to fill up first? It's like, if your known knowns and your known unknowns are lopsided, then yes, like, start to fill in those gaps, because some people have known unknowns, and it's like that shouldn't really exist. Like, if there's something that you find yourself, or subset of training that you find yourself inadequately prepared, prepare. Like, it's not hard. Like, I just go in 10 minutes before someone walks in my room, like, hey, what do they got? Oh, they have dish. I remember that word from grad school. Hold on a second. Dish. Oh, diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis. Oh, yeah, that thing. And it's like, you get it in like the shoulder. It's like, it dishes. It's kind of like had hydroxyapatite deposition, whatever disorder, but it doesn't have the, yeah, okay, I get some of this. A few buzzwords. Okay, I know what not to do. I know what to do. Like, being prepared is the prerequisite to making good decisions, right? So it's like, all right, here we have someone who might default to making the worst decision, which is indecision. And then you have someone who wants to take a first step. It's like, okay, identify your known unknowns. What are the things that you suck at? Great. Okay, how can you throw enough smoke at that in the short term, gain enough transient data to at least be, and I don't want to use the term 1% better, but at least be more informed on making a decision around that thing that that you suck at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think an important part too is being adaptable after the fact, right? It's okay to make a bad decision or a worse decision on that spectrum of better and worse. But if you can adapt and identify that immediately, then that's what's going to help you make less of those decisions over time. I've made bad decisions training clients before. I'm like, oh shit, I'm not going to do that again. But as long as you realize that, and in that moment, you can have that moment of self-awareness and say, okay, that was a worse decision in this situation, and think back, like, what would have been a better outcome? How do I make that decision next time? Or how do I kind of put this in, my memory banks, that in this scenario, I've made this decision. Let's see what happens if I do this instead next time. And that's a big piece that I think is missing with a lot of, air quote this, coaches nowadays, because that's experience is what that is, right? You can't get that on the internet writing spreadsheets. I think a lot of people use information as an excuse to have a lack of experience nowadays. And that's where you're going to fail making these decisions, or maybe not fail, but you're not going to have the adaptability to make the wrong decision and then come back and maybe admit it and make a better decision to follow that up, or say like it's not the end of the world if you make a bad decision with the client, as long as you can be honest and have a dialogue with them, be like, okay, I don't think that was the right thing for you, we're going to do this because X, Y, and Z. And that also comes back to what you were saying, is putting thought into that, right? Like it's not necessarily right or wrong, but if you have thought and you can explain your thought process to me, and it's based in reality, off valid principles and truths, things that we believe to be true, then you're probably not going to make a bad decision, or you're probably not wrong if you can think through this and if there's some sort of rationale around it. But I think a lot of people, that they're either not grounded in reality or they don't have that thought behind it. So that's kind of two ideas that I think are they may lead to indecision, is people not being able to be adaptable or having that experience, or not thinking about the decisions that they're making or the information that they have at hand.
Right. And there's one thing that you said, and that's grounded in solid principles, that I think is really big,
Yes.
and I want to touch on, but I want to share another stupid thing that I've done in my life.
I'm so
Gino
excited.
Brazolan, if you're ever out there, if you're listening to this, I apologize. And you're also like a G of a client. Um, I prescribed, and this is one of the errors I made, was I wouldn't, I sometimes I'd have to do my spreadsheets on my phone because it wouldn't work, and the Wi-Fi on the plane or whatever. I was updating clients when I was coaching clients more regularly, and I prescribed a 17-second eccentric for Gino Brazolan's lap pull downs, sets of 12.
Oh,
And like I just like didn't. I mean, I went through everything, and I was like, I don't know, I forget where I was, and updated the spreadsheet. Check in, voice note, whatever, all good. Didn't realize that the eccentric component of the lift was 17 seconds long, and was checking in with him the next week. Totally, like not a word said, and I was like, yeah, how are you feeling? Blah, blah, blah. He goes, man, yeah, dude, last week's workout, whew, tough. And I was like, we didn't really do anything that out of the ordinary. In my brain, I didn't think so. And he goes, yeah, those eccentrics on the lat pull down really smoked me. And I was just like, what is he talking about? And I go to the last week's program, and it's like, 3 sets of like, I don't know, whatever, 8, 10, 12 reps, or whatever the rep scheme was, a 17-second eccentric, and homeboy did every rep. I'm like, dude, you were there for 3.5 hours just doing lat pull downs. Like, what the fuck? And he's like, was
it's an
that a
8-minute set.
mistake? I'm like, dog, yeah, that was definitely a mistake. And he goes, oh yeah, I'm still pretty sore. I was like, we're gonna take a few days off and then go test yourself to see if you got rab though. Like, what the fuck? And but that's a blunder that I'm gonna air out there. But also, you brought up the point of principles. Now, I think this is where like just ownership and responsibility come in. Like if you want to take credit for your client's results, you have to be willing to take ownership over where things go wrong. Right. And I think that's
Yep.
two things. Like that's a sign of like just leadership on the whole. Right. Everyone wants to take credit, but no one wants to take the blame. And it's like, look,
Mm-hmm.
and I could tell you this, and then and you're right there with me the entire way, that being in a leadership role is more about taking blame than taking credit. Like that's your job.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, there's a grenade on the ground. Hold on, I'm just gonna throw myself on it real quick. And then when you win the war, it's never your fault, or it's never your reason. You're never the reason as to why. So that's like thing number one. Like if you want to be looked at
Mm-hmm.
by people who pay you money as like, and this is an angle that more people are going in like the lifestyle realm. And it's like, do whatever you want. But if you want to be seen as that in the eyes of your clients, like the first step is not about taking credit. The first step is about taking like blame. And that's sort of step number one. And the reason I bring that up is the protocols advocate responsibility, right? So a lot of people will go down a protocol. And we had this last weekend. We just got back from teaching a seminar in Vancouver. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that was kind of relayed to us at the end was this was a unique seminar because it wasn't a protocol. And they said like we kind of lost them on the first day because they were like, okay, wait, where's the step-by-step how to do the prescript thing? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, how do you think? Like, is that what we need to teach? Like, how to think? And then I kind of realized that
Yeah.
that wasn't a joke, and it kind of was low key what they needed to learn. They needed to learn how to think, and nothing against them. It's more to say like our contemporaries in the education space or be like, okay, what's our shtick? What's our numbered process, like our 7-step process, our 12-step process. It's like, well, we didn't really have any of that. It's just like, I don't know, think about the shit that you do, and if you think a little bit deeper, you'll probably do things a little bit different. And it's just there's a siren song of doing your job, being there to take the credit with a protocols based approach, like, oh, I did this and it worked, but then when it doesn't work, blame the protocol. Right, like, and we see this in the clinical space all the time. Like, I'm a ARTU practitioner, I'm a Graston practitioner, I'm a whatever. It's like, how about you be you and do stuff, and when things go wrong, own it, and then when things go right, you also get to own it. And for like a really long time, things are probably going to go more wrong than right. And then if you have enough testicular fortitude and you can rough it out, maybe, you start to get the shooting percentage up to 51%. And you start doing like one better than you previously did. And then all of a sudden you're probably in the top 1% of the 1% of your respective field. But it's just like, for me, it's always a thing of like, people know where their holes are in like learning or application. Start there, because everyone's just looking for more unknowns and causing more. It's like, look, there's a lot of stuff you need to learn before you are confident in what you know, and start looking for things that you don't.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't know what side of the fucking bed to piss in and you're a new trainer, a new coach, it's like, let's start there. Right? Like, let's not get overwhelmed by like the shit that someone who's been in the game for like 15 years, 20 years, 30 years knows. It's like, let's start where they started, not where they are now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's funny, man, because as I think about this is the majority of people. There's so much information that is so readily available, and even if you don't want it, you just get bombarded with it. Like on social media, like I like to follow my friends. I like to, keep up with what skyline you're posting or what flannel Mac's wearing in Vegas right now. But at the same time, I get all this shit that I never asked for. So
No.
people get these posts, and maybe it's a very valid post, right? I had someone come in my office the other day, and we were talking about posture, right? Man, I want to throw up just saying it. But this person told me they saw a video on, and this is going to make you want to throw up. They saw a video on TikTok, and they brought it up to me, and I just started laughing. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. And they're telling me how someone used this drawing with like bungee cords to tell them what happens to their posture when they sit. And this is all information that this person's getting, but they're getting it without context. And even though these things that this person is probably taking all this time and effort to make this post about may be true, they may not be false, but the idea is, how important is this shit? In the overall 100% of fucks that you have to give in a single day, how much of this should it occupy? And I think a lot like the kids at this seminar this past weekend is, we're not giving them a system. The system or the protocol, that's outsourced responsibility, right? I don't know. The system's supposed to work. It didn't work. You may not be a good candidate. But when you have information, it's your responsibility to interpret that and see how many fucks should be given to that information. And even though this information might be true, it may not be worthy of a single fuck that you have to give on any given day. So I 100% agree with that it's, it's about taking responsibility, but also understanding that if you're someone that's giving advice to other people, it's your responsibility to interpret this information and give it to people in a way where they understand how important each of these variables is.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you got to hold the general public responsible. And ultimately, that point is always like, everyone is ultimately responsible for the decisions that they make. And I think the unique thing that we need to kind of consider is people who so haphazardly make decisions, in like the health and fitness space. Let's say, like, I had a very similar conversation with the guy that owns the sneaker store underneath my crib like 25 minutes ago. He was like talking to me about like what I eat and if I was a vegan bodybuilder, and I was like,
Oh my
what?
God.
vegan? Like, no, dog. Everything I eat had parents. And he's like, oh, aren't you scared? I was like, what? Being a bitch? And he's like, no. And he started like listing off all these documentaries. And I was like, yeah. Like, you just need to shut up for a second. But it's like, and this guy's like he owns a sneaker store, but that's just a passion project. He's into like finance and he's an investor and he's worth a ton of money. But it's like, I'm like, look, I don't know. I don't know anything about banks or money or investing or anything. But it's like, I'm like, are there like the crypto shit that's going on right now, like this FTX stuff and all that? And like, I'm like, what was your initial take on all that? Being like a finance guy, South Florida, like real estate developer, all this. And he was like, oh, yeah, I knew from the get go that this was bullshit, right? And it's like, it was a scam for people who didn't know anything about like money or trading. Like it wasn't trading, it was betting. And like that's even more so than what trading usually is. And normal trading is betting. And he was talking to like an investment guy. And so I was like, right. Okay, cool. So like you kind of have this insider scoop because you're a professional at, investing and finance and all this. And you look at this thing that's like super trendy and you with like all your experience look at it and go like, yo, that FTX stuff, that stuff is nonsense. Like this whole thing's a bubble. These MIT kids are just running some orgy out of Grand Cayman Islands or whatever the fuck. And you get that. And he's like, right? And I was like, right. Okay. So like when I see or I hear the Netflix documentary special thing as like you citing some fitness shit, my brain works like the way your brain works when you were hearing on that the FTX crypto shit. And he's like, oh, right. So I was like, so you kind of see the thing, like you got to be able to extrapolate that feeling, that gut, whether or not, and this is where like decision making starts. Like I look at decision making like kind of through three scales of like the head, the heart, and the gut. But it's usually the gut that tips you off that there's a decision to even be made, right? Like there are things that we do, and it's a luxury. Look, decisions are. And we talked about this the other day at like the airport. It's like having a choice is freedom, because who doesn't have a choice? People who are not free, right? So like let's start there. But a lot of times people don't identify where they even have choices, which is like we've talked a lot about, we've moved the goalpost a few times about prerequisites of decision making. But I think the number one is like, is there a decision to be made here? And a lot of people get so indoctrinated to a certain way of being or thinking that they can't even abstract outside of just a path that's set for them to realize that something that they can do differently. And that's really big. So like this might be a person who's very influenced by the media, and I hate to just broad blanket statement like the media, but let's be specific. Like this person is someone who believes like someone with an editorial credential that's posting a documentary on Netflix has collected all the data and might not have a self-serving interest in what they put out. That's probably like a finer point on the situation. But I can so clearly bring like I can shine a light on that and be like, well, you see how this part plays out in your world and how you might see that this is a little bit silly when people react to crypto or NFTs or all that. And I'm like, yeah, so that's the same thing. But he doesn't even realize that going against this thing is even a choice. And then when I take that choice, I'm like, that's dumb. You should probably be eating animal meat. It's probably safer than, the Impossible Burger that Schultz kept eating this weekend like a bitch. And it was just like,
What a
he
bitch.
didn't, he was just like, I don't understand. And it's like, no, like it's a choice. Right? It's like that is a thing that doesn't have to be what is said to you. That does not a constant. And I think people just like, and it's twofold. Like I know this guy a little bit because I pop in his store pretty much every day. So I know he's smart enough when I lay that down to be like, hey, this is the analogy that I think will land. And he's like, oh, like, okay, I get where I'm kind of being short-sighted and reactive and kind of believing the hype because I see in my own world where I've ascended to a certain level of expertise or professionalism or experience that it's like I see the holes in that. Like I can see the flaws in my way of thinking when I bring it into my own world where I know. But fitness is so nebulous. Lots to do with the fact that there's a lot of people in there purveying misinformation or have the wrong intention in the way they make decisions. But I think that was pretty illuminating for him to be like, oh shit, right? Like fitness kind of touches everyone's lives at a certain point to a certain degree, right? Like and he's just like, yo, I just want to like be healthy. Like I'm in my 40s and I just want like my bloods to be like good. I was like, have you taken blood work? And he's like, no. I was like, all right, well, like make the choice to do
Start
the
there,
thing that
yeah.
acts in a lot. Right. So it's just, there's a lot. I think the hardest part about the decision making process is understand where there are choices to be made. And like a lot of that
Yeah.
kind of digs down to self-awareness, but where are the choices to be made is probably the most overlooked thing. And then the importance of making a choice, because the
Yeah.
importance of making a
Hmm.
choice then brings awareness to the fact that inaction is in itself a choice, and it's usually, if not always, like the worst choice to make. So when you're
Yeah.
making decisions, I think to the general population, I know a lot of people that listen to this are more fitness enthusiasts. So maybe this is conversations you bring to your clients, is like, most people, if you have disposable income to spend with a coach or a trainer or whatever, you're probably good enough at something to recognize a, the bullshit in your field. Because look, if humans are full of bullshit, we're full of bullshit. But
Everyone.
there's radar. There's a radar that's going to go off. Like if you're an insurance adjuster, right? Like, okay, imagine some guy calls you and his house just went up into flames, but his house also went up into flames like 3.5 months ago. Is that going to like set off a thing? It's like, right. I'm like, we'll have like that alarm system of things that you just realize are like, oh, okay, this doesn't sit well with me. Like create that criteria for things around health and fitness, because it's just like people are so quick. I don't know why, and maybe it's just because we know better in this industry. But that's the way I think. Like when I look at crypto and NFTs, and a really easy example. But when I look at things that are flashy, that are highly advertised, that are, I don't know, transient, like things that kind of come out of nowhere in other fields that I don't really know, my guard is always
Hmm.
up first. Right? Like when I start seeing
Yeah.
Tony Robbins ads, I'm just like, all right, banana hands. Like what is like I'm just everyone is guilty until proven innocent. And I think people
Hmm.
should adopt a healthy dose of skepticism, because I think at the very least that's going to it's going to initiate some sort of investigation into something, so that the decision that you land on is something that you've thought about, and you don't just sway with the tactics and strategies of people who are meant to manipulate you and prey on those those more primal reactive parts of your brain. So I think if you just approach a situation with like a level of skepticism when you're making a decision, you're going to put a little bit more effort into the outcome of that decision. And again, it still could be wrong, but at least it was
Yeah.
more informed than just kind of like going with the tides.
Yeah. I think that's a really good analogy. I actually really like that, like crypto was FTX bullshit kind of analogy.
Yeah.
Um, I think it makes a lot of sense. But as you were kind of going through that thought process, you mentioned that the way you make decisions is between your head, your heart, and your gut. I kind of have a thought on that, but I want to hear, is there a way that you approach that, those three things? Like, how do you interact with each of those, areas of decision making?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to awareness, right? Like that's got to be, because you
Always.
got to realize what is contributing to what, right? And so I
Yeah.
think it's like an honest conversation of like, I think the gut is always, it's not, it always comes down to what do you want to get out of the decision, right? Like
Hmm.
I had this kind of explained to me a few times. Like today, when I almost got in a fight with this kid from the NFL, and I was just like, "What do I need out of this decision? Like, what do I need?" I'm like, "I need to go home. Like, I don't need to go to jail. I don't need to go on ESPN. I just need to go
Yeah.
home." So that's like the number one thing. Is like, what do I want to get out of this? Like, truly, and then even that's hard, because
Yeah.
like, you know, you'd love for it to go right in front of like a room full of NFL free agents, and like you be the guy that just fucking beats the shit out of this clown. And but it's like, look, and I'm not saying it would have went that way at all. Like he was a big kid, but it's like in your heart of hearts, like, what do you really want? I'm like, I want to go home. Like I just want to go home. It's been a long ass day, and I just want to go home. So rather than taking some, you know, and a lot of that is kind of what you alluded to earlier about like values. Like, what do you value? Going home. Like I value going the fuck home. I value like not being here. So it's like, all right, then you can set out a real course of action. So it's like acting on behalf of your values then allows you to go like, because my gut is still 16. and my gut will be 16 forever, I think, because my gut instinct was like, fuck this clown. He looks at me like this
Yeah.
again. He's eating the fucking post that comes out of the prowler sled that I was holding on to. I was like, this is going right to the teeth. I'm going to strike first, and I'm going to have to explain to the NFLPA why one of their guys who came to train with us is missing his front row of teeth. But so that was my gut. And then my heart was like, all right, man, like this kid is a miscommunicate. He thought I was talking to him, or I thought he was talking to me, and he wasn't. So I was confused. And maybe like I was like my confused face thought he was giving him a smug look, and he's in the middle of training. And it's also like, it's you're fucking 15, 17th through the season, and this guy still hasn't signed with a squad, so it doesn't look like it's probably in the cards for him this year to get on a roster. And he's been like busting his ass in here, and he's not like the top prospect and whatever. So I was like, all right. And then my head was like, all right, what are we doing here? Like, you're gonna knock this guy's teeth out with the steel pole from the Rogue Prowler sled? You're gonna like cuss him out? You're gonna like get in a bunch of shit? You want to turn this into a thing, or you want to go home? And I was like, yeah. No, I want to go the fuck home. And then I was just like, oh no, like sorry, man. And then like some people got involved, and then it was broken up, and I was like, all right, like I was still kind of confused, but. I think the awareness piece of who's at the table and who's talking, because like for me the gut it's persuasive, and some people are different. Like some
Yeah.
people the mind is too persuasive, right? Some people are too data driven, and that
Yeah.
could be like it crowds or clouds rather your gut instinct, or it clouds like an emotional slant to the story that you tell yourself. So, and I think it too, like understanding where you slant to, right? If you are more like, gut driven, gut instinct driven, like, hey man, you might want to like take that vote and dilute it a little bit, because that's going to be the thing that you hold like, and it's situational, right? Person to person. Like I look at a guy
Yeah.
like Mac, right? Mac's a gut guy, but it's like he
I love
knows
it.
that. So yeah, oh dude, he's a gut instinct guy, and his gut instinct is like, it's born out of the environment that he grew up in, and it's like survival, survival, survival. So he needs to
Yeah.
like, it's almost like the way they do the electoral college in the United States. It's like, yeah, there's not a lot of residents there, man. So that only counts as one seat, where it's like the brain is going to count for two, and the heart's going to count for three. Because if you can drum up a vote in the heart category, that should probably weigh in more, because that you're going to be voting strong with the gut. So, and I see him do this all the time, because like if we went off his instinct and he didn't if he wasn't able to tap into like the head and the heart, he'd be in prison, like without a doubt. Like there's not a
Yeah.
doubt in my mind that guy would be incarcerated in a federal penitentiary. So I think there's two things. One, you need to understand where these voices are coming from, and three, you need to be able to weight them relative to your predisposition. And look, because like you see it on the other side, right? Like you see people who make decisions emotionally, which is like, hey, I get it, that happens, and they can silence a thought in their head, or they can silence a gut instinct. So I think it's twofold. I think first is the awareness to understand where which is coming from, right? And it's not like the voice of the gut talking on behalf of the heart or the head, right? For those people who are more gut instinct driven. And then it's like, all right, once you figure out like who's speaking for which category, then you can start to be like, all right, how should I relatively weight these three categories based off my predisposition? If I'm more analytical, right? Maybe I should do like, it's so funny the exposure we have to people who have such predispositions to make decisions a certain way. Like I think of like, imagine Mac and Matt Penny in a room, and it's not hard to imagine. We work with these guys all
I
the
love
time,
it.
but it's
I
like you
love
want to
it.
you want to talk a dude that's all gut. It's going to be Macintosh, right? Like
Hmm.
he's constantly like has an object on him that he can plunge into someone's throat at any given point, and thinks about it often. I know, I live with him. But then you think of a guy like Penny, right? And Penny's like, the most analytical, like ones and zeros number guy you could probably ever want to meet in your life. But you can see both of them have the awareness of how they make decisions, and they give the floor to those other two decision making entities more than they'd like to, but they know that it's going to get them the outcome that will be the truth for them.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, that's funny because I think you said everything I was thinking, just in different words than the way I was thinking of it. And I think the Mac versus Matt analogy really hits home. I think of it more like it's logic versus emotion, right? And Matt is absolutely the logic side of that equation, right? Is what is the most probable thing to happen here? That's what I'm going to go with. Or what decision here makes the outcome that I want most probable? I'm going to go with that. Versus, even separating like heart and gut, I think gut is it's almost like reaction, right? Is like, if I were in this scenario, what's my knee jerk reaction? Is how am I gonna react in X, Y, and Z? And that's definitely Mac, absolutely. And the heart is almost like the midway between both, right? It's like, how would I react in the moment versus if I kind of inform that reaction with my logic, and then to me, that's where the decision almost has to be made, is from the heart. Is that maybe the heart kind of defers to one of these two more if you're more of a logical or an emotional person. But I think and this is me personally, I don't think everyone is this way, but this is kind of how I make decisions, because it's, yes, you can use data to inform the outcomes of the decisions that you're going to make, or you can just make a decision and then clean up the mess afterwards. Sound like Mac? but
Literally.
but yeah, but I think if you're making a decision with your heart, or as I make a decision with my heart, I'm both using the logic, because I feel like I'm a very logical person. I may be completely fucking out of it. Who the fuck knows? But if you're informing the emotions with the logic, I feel like that gives you probably your best outcome in terms of decision making, because you're never really going to know. You can be as logical as possible, and you could be making a decision that involves someone that's on the other side of that spectrum, that's super emotional, and you guys are just on two different wavelengths. I've definitely been in that scenario before. So me personally, I think is using the logic to inform the emotion is a really effective way to go about making decisions from a pretty balanced mindset.
Yeah, for me, the heart always weighs in on the long-term outcome.
Yes, absolutely.
Like the gut's going to be like short-term. Like, it is reactionary. It's more primal. And look, sometimes like when like I look at like getting in a fight now in my age is really like firing a missile from a submarine. Not in order, not
Yeah.
in like any sort of magnitude sense. Like it's a rusty old boat. Like, it's not going anywhere. I'm probably gonna trip and like fall or some shit. But it's really like, all right, like you got to have two SOs turn their keys, right, and then you got to
Yeah.
wait for the like.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like the the gut key is just stuck on turn. Like my whole life, it's just like, no, it's good. Like
I'm ready to go,
it's ready.
motherfucker.
I'm ready to go.
I got the sled
But it's
post in
just
my
like,
hand.
yeah, and then the rest of it now is just like the rest of me just wants to go home. And so like the
Mhm.
gut's always down for like, it's gonna feel really good if I just
Yeah.
fucking deck this asshole. But
Yes.
the heart's looking out for the long term. And the thing is, I think the older you get, the heart catches up way quicker. So like, for example, if I were to have been in a situation when I was like 19, I remember being 19 years old and walking through, it was Halloween. Yeah, it would have been 19. I was walking through a bar called The Beach in downtown Windsor on Olette Avenue. It was Halloween. The girl I was dating at the time was dressed as Barbie, and I was dressed as Ken. I was not drinking. I did not drink, but I still, thank God I didn't, because I would have been a nightmare. I was holding a Red Bull can that was completely sealed, and we were walking through the bar, and it's a nightclub, like whatever. And I saw this guy's hand enter stage left and grab her ass while we were walking through the bar. And she thought it was me. And so as she's turning to like just smile or whatever, I take the fucking bottom of the Red Bull can and I drive this right, like, not, I didn't hit his nose. I went through his nose. Like, it was just the
Yes.
most, like, the gut was just turning everyone's keys. And this guy is like, and we've all seen it. Like, I'm sure half the people listening to this podcast, like, you've seen a nose explode before, because that's what noses do. They just explode. And so, like, I just exploded this kid's nose with the can. And, like, he just, like, dropped and got, like, trampled. Someone was I don't know, maybe it was they were, what would have the song been? Were they were they doing, they, maybe people were doing the Dougie, maybe, and whatever. He just got trampled by, and she turned around and smiled and didn't even realize that, like, that she just thought it was me and smiled, and I just kept walking, and then just like wiped the blood off my Red Bull can and just kept going, and like there was just nothing to it. And it took a while for me to be like, and I'm talking like a couple of years for me to be like, was that wrong? Like I literally was like, should I not have done that? But like the heart was a little late to the party, but now it's like
Yeah.
when I make decisions and I don't, and I don't, violence is just such an easy case to like highlight the decision making process because it's so visceral. But now it's like I immediately felt good about my decision as I was making it today. Like I felt good that I was not wiping the, and again, like I'm not saying it could have went my way, but the fact that I didn't have to, like, you know, have to go through this, I was like, oh man, like the time, not even by the time I got home, by the time like 3 minutes later where I was just packing up my backpack to go home, I was like, oh man, you know how much this would have sucked to file a police report right now and like not have to be going home. So it's just like
That's
the older
so
you, and it's,
true.
I don't even think it's an age thing, like it's just an experience thing of like, you know, where I was so prone to like violence at a younger age. It was like, you know, it took me to I don't know, like 3 or 4 years later, maybe to be like, that could have been a conversation, maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. But now it's like, all right, I'm not opting to go this route, and I immediately feel better about it. And I think that's a good litmus test, and it's something that I like. I talk to my shrink about all the time. Like when I get mad, the goal is to like beat the time it takes me to get back to not mad, like the refractory
Yeah.
period to normal. Because it could be like someone would cut me off, and I'd be like fucking pissed for like an hour and a half. And now
Yeah.
it's like as they're cutting me off, I'm like, okay, whatever. Like it's like minimizing that time. Because the thing is, I think
Yeah.
when you allow something to go through without a filter, you start to let a lot more through without a filter. So you lose sight of things that are also choices because you're stuck in like, you know, you're stuck in the smoke of firing off a shot that was maybe not authorized by the rest of the system, and then all of a sudden it's like you keep acting in that particular way, right? Like
Yeah.
you've given authority to that as like, this is the dictator of my decision making process now. So for the next hour or 2 hours or days or months, or some people it's their entire life, they just give the keys over to the heart, the head, or the gut, and it's like, this is a democracy here, right? And the votes need to be tallied. So I think, and I've lost out on a lot of things of just being stuck in one particular thought, and that you lose out by not realizing where the decisions are after that.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of that self awareness piece of it is my thought process when I'm in that scenario. Say someone cuts me off and I'm fucking pissed about it, is I just ask myself why. Because a lot of times what I realize is that the thing that happened that made me mad isn't really why I'm pissed off. There's probably like four other things in the back of my brain that I'm just like, I'm on edge. Like, just give me a motherfucking reason. I mean, I have those days, dude. It's literally like I'll go on a walk at the middle of the night with my hood up, AirPods in, just like hoping someone picks a fight with me. I'm just give me a fucking reason. I need to hit someone today. But like, it's never the thing that sets me off that is the issue. It's these other things that I'm either not dealing with or that are on my mind that are still pending that are causing the issue. So in those moments, I like to kind of like you say, you try to beat yourself in how long it takes you to return to normal. It's me is I just try and have the awareness to say, why am I actually feeling this way? And then deal with the things that are making me feel that way, as opposed to react to the thing that, pissed me off in that moment.
I because you can get arrested for like knuckle dusters. So what I used to
Yeah.
do was I used to work at a hardware store, and I would make with like 3/4 inch copper pipe. I would cap one end, and then I would use we have bags of like instant cement. So I would fill the copper pipe with instant cement and cap it, put some water in so the cement set, and then I would wrap the whole thing with electrical tape, and I'd make it like I'd cut the pipe to the length of my knuckles, and I'd have a little bit more to hang out, and then that would be my thing. Was I would just go walk around with that in my pocket, and just be like, all right, who's getting it tonight? And
Yeah.
I mean, it was a terrible idea, but it was 100%. Yeah. The idea of, you weren't mad for any reason, like, oh, the teacher gave me a C+ and my girlfriend
Yeah.
doesn't like me anymore. And My Chemical Romance came out with a new album, and my Hurley background on my MySpace doesn't work. Someone's gonna feel this. Like, he's just such an idiot.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, but I mean, as it pertains to training, let's try and reel it in. But it's the same shit.
Yeah.
It's just like people. I think they spend too much time on the black swans. And look, that's almost like you have to earn that in a certain sense. Like you have to be, you have to constantly be auditing yourself on the decisions you make, and you have to
Mhm.
you have to be clearing these audits at a clip that's so consistently positive, and you're even auditing your auditing systems and making sure, like, do you know what you know? Right? Is it reproducible? Are you getting results by chance? Are you getting results by design? Like, do you understand the mechanisms? And then when you see permutations, you can alter your approach based off of, an understanding of those underlying mechanisms. Then once you've done that for 10 years, you can start to be like, okay, all right, I know what I know now. Right? And a lot of people, like, they focus on either they know what they don't know, which is like hugely concerning, because the rate by which you can transfer stuff that you don't know to knowing is entirely just based on your dedication and wantingness to know it, right? And then the more you take this knowledge and you apply it, that's when, like, the real knowing happens. But there's so many people that just look right past that and sort of like into this abyss of, like, the black swan, like the unknown. And it's like, look, man, that's a dark place. I wouldn't recommend starting. Like, you end up gazing in there after you've gone through this process of, like, data validation over the stuff you do, and it really only becomes possible if you do, if you have a decision by which, or you have a system by which you make decisions, right? And then it's
Mhm.
like, when you've made decisions based off of the system consistently, and you consistently start to see the results you expect, then it's like, all right, then you start to creep off into, like, all right, what am I missing here, right? So that when the day comes when you come across something that you haven't seen, that you're unfamiliar with, how is your decision making system going to hold up? Right? Like, that's really, like, I would never start someone there. I would never be like, hey, you ever considered this and this? It's like, I've never even heard the words you just said before. It's like, if you don't know what, like, a bicep does, or where it inserts or originates, it's like, I don't know if we should be talking about the difference between, undulating periodization and, like, wave loading or linear or whatever. It's like, there's a lot of things you don't know. Let's get over that first. Let's see how you deal with the adversity that comes with overcoming the more remedial steps, because let me tell you, it doesn't scale in a linear fashion, overcoming the adversity that comes with learning the things as they get more abstract, right? The complexity and the difficulty of learning those things increases exponentially the more complex, even seemingly linear, that the underlying concepts you're trying to learn are. So many people just discourage themselves into inaction by trying to, like, look at people who are talking about more abstract things that might relate to where they are in their career, and then go, oh my goodness. It's like, no, like, you need to take every requisite step along the way for no other reason than learning the level of discomfort, or your tolerance for discomfort in learning these things, right? You need to learn the discomfort that comes with learning, because that discomfort is going to ramp up exponentially the more complex. So if you don't have a tolerance for handling the discomfort of, dealing in this realm of known unknowns, if you start to stick your neck out into the universe of, or an attempt to find the unknown unknowns, it's like, dude, you're going to need that mental fortification that allows you to sit with an idea that you don't understand. That is honestly, like, one of the most, it's definitely a gift if you see it that way, and the only way you can see it that way is by climbing to the requisite vantage point and taking the steps to make that climb. Because if you try and just, like, if you try and just, like, skip the queue and get to that point and look over that vista, it's like, you're not going to be able to see anything, man. Like, you're just going to be completely blinded into inaction, So it's just, and it's hard to hear this from someone who's done it, right? And I get that because I've had people lay this warning shot at my feet when I was younger, and it was like, you like, and look, maybe you'll never learn it, and maybe learning it, maybe the only lessons you ever learn are lessons you learn the hard way, and I'm a pretty firm believer
That's the case
of
for me
that.
for sure. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, and maybe those are the lessons you need. The lessons you need to learn are the ones you learn the hard way. But it's like, it's annoying to hear from someone who's gone through it to a certain degree. Like, I don't know, I've been doing this more in my life than I haven't in my life at this point. Right. I've been in health and fitness as somewhat of a career more in my existence than not that. Right. So it can be kind of annoying, but at the same time, it's just like, I can guarantee you, if you take the steps, if you climb the rungs of the ladder, you will get to that vista where then you can start to look out at the unknown unknowns and appreciate not knowing what you're looking at, and sit like for days. There's concepts you read about or I read about, and I'm just like, and it doesn't bother you anymore, right? Like, I used to get this. Have you ever like had to, there's like how you've had like a thought escape your head, or something was just on the tip of your tongue, or like, oh, who is the actor in that movie or whatever? I remember like going through this and noticing a change, and I stopped Google searching things that bothered me like that, because it's like, this is a known unknown, right? I know I don't know this, right? But I'm gonna sit with it until it comes up. Like, oh, it's fucking Tom Hanks in Sleepless in Seattle or whatever, and it'll come to me like 5 days later, right? And that, just the simple act of like being like, no, I'm not going to take the easy way out and Google search it. I'm going to sit here with this feeling of like, I know I don't know it, but I know it, in this like idling state, and I'm just gonna sit with it until it comes to me, and not opting for like the easy way out. And I remembered like the meta thought of thinking about why I was doing that, and it just kind of being like, well, that's weird, because I would usually just pull out my phone and just get it out of my head. But then I like relished in the idea of just sitting there and just like scrolling through every movie I've ever seen, and scrolling through all the faces in the movie, or trying to pick out a scene or something. And it was just like, that was so eye-opening to me. And now it's like, I look for that, right? I'm constantly across the board. I literally, the words, I think one of the next tattoos I'm going to get is a giant fucking black swan somewhere, because it's like, that's the goal, man. Like, to be able to find somewhere you just sit and just be like, what the fuck? Like, how? And then like, it could be months or weeks, because I think too many people just get so comfortable, like, well, this has been reproducible a little bit, probably by complete happenstance, I'm just going to do this forever. It's like, you want to stay like in your little fucking driveway of thought, and you don't even want to put the car in reverse? Like, are you joking me? You just want to fucking, dude, it's such a drab existence. But people opt in, and it feels comfortable, and that's the way they live their life. And it's like, fuck, man, you're missing out.
Yeah. That's a lot. I don't know. To me, it just comes down to being confident in the decision that you're making and being self-aware enough to reassess, and probably not much more than that. I don't know. I'm still going to Google search the movie.
Really? Oh, dude, I'm telling you, try it. It'll change your life. Honestly, it was a point
for you. I'm going to try it.
Just sit with it, because like, I don't know. To me, it's just like a canary down the coal mine, because I'll find myself being like, oh fuck, and I'm like, no, chill, because it's something where it's like, that's when you know you've learned it, right? Like, there's you'll never ask yourself that questioning, and that's a fact. Like, scientifically, like, if you ask Google, you'll always ask Google, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you
agree with that.
because you don't actually learn it, and so like, I think people get so uncomfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, and it's like, and look, and here's the thing: we're all comfortable with the idea of being physically uncomfortable. That's what weightlifting is. None of us have done what we've done physically without that. But I think like the goal of that, like when people talk about like training being therapy, it's like, okay, yes, I understand that, it's like a release of some aggression or whatever, some transient. Okay, cool. But that's not the goal of it. Training, like, the goal is to be like, okay, you can sit with this physical discomfort and like live in this state that most people can't. But if you can't like have a hard conversation with someone that like should have like that's based off of like, hey, I've taken an inventory of heart, the head, and the gut, and I feel, think, and instinctively driven towards this. But it's like, I don't give a fuck how long you can stay in an ice bath for, right? If you stay in an ice bath for 5 minutes but cheat on your wife, you're missing the fucking point, dude. Right? And it's just such a pervasive thought that this is building some sort of mental fortitude. It's like, no, it's not. It's self-masturbation on the internet. Please stop taking videos because I know you're a piece of shit. Right? Like, it's just, it like, there's a higher purpose to all these things that's more than just like, you know, like, do you got to do that one thing a day? Like, yeah, Goggins. And like, I don't want to shit on Goggins because like, I'm sure he's like, he seems like a badass dude. And I guarantee you he has tough conversations that he should be having. Like, if something comes up and he's like knows it's something that should be talked about, it's immediately addressed. Right. But that's the point. Right. It's not about running on the side of the road for 7 hours a day and calling everyone a bitch, including yourself. It's like when shit needs to get done and needs to get handled outside of you putting on your ASIC shoes when you don't want to, or outside of, you know, going into the cold plunge first thing in the morning when you don't want to. It's like, that's great. But if that's the only time you're addressing things and doing things you don't want to, then you should probably fuck that thing off entirely and save that for when it actually matters.
Right.
That's my rant of the day. And that's a lot of rants, but it's just like, dude, it's people just fool themselves. And it's like, you're not an orator. You're not a shaman. You're it's a luxury that you can wake up and do these things every single day. It's a luxury to have a fucking choice. Right. And it's just like exercising that choice by just dipping your balls in ice is like, okay, that's one thing, but maybe you should exercise that choice when you actually have, you know, when there's real consequences on the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely agree, dude.
I wish this was more about training because it's a podcast about training, but I also don't at all, because I think it's something where people scapegoat training to a degree, right? They scapegoat training and they think it's the answer to all their problems. And it's like, no, it should start to raise more questions than answers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's why we're both sitting right here right now.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think the biggest thing is for me, and maybe to put a bow on this, is like, have an and whether it's heart, the head, and the gut, whether it's, you know, logic versus emotion, I think having at least an awareness of how you make decisions, and it doesn't even have to be like, you know, it doesn't have to be something that you're setting forth to do. It's just like, or maybe a recognition of how you make decisions. Maybe that's a better way, because we all make decisions somehow. Maybe like try to figure out, like, recognize the system by which you make decisions, and then see where that system might be flawed, and see where that system might be leading you to make indecisions, right? Or to stop you from making decisions. Because I think that's, because once you get practice making decisions, and indecision is never an option. Like, indecision is never ever an option. There's always a choice. And the more you realize that, the more you start to, it opens your eyes to like the number of choices that you can make and aren't. And then you have infinite amount of practice in making decisions on everything, right? And then the more, it's just like, it's like anything in the sense that the more decisions you make, the better you get at making decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Name of this podcast will be Suck Less, the Art of Making Decisions.
Perfect. It'll be on the bestsellers list.
Right. Yeah. It's, you know, we need to put like a swear word in it. That's why that means it's going to sell at the airport.
Yeah. Suck less. Pussy.
Right. Yeah. With like a little star, like that one guy's book about not giving a fuck or whatever.
Right.
All right. That's it. That's all the time we have for today. Episode 7 billion, RX Radio. Appreciate you guys tuning in.